325 AD, Nicaea. Several hundred bishops packed into a massive hall, arguing, shouting, occasionally hitting each other. One bishop, according to the accounts, got so furious at his opponent that he slapped him across the face mid-session. Officially, this was a theological dispute about the nature of Christ. In practice, it was the founding convention of the most powerful corporation the next 2,000 years would ever see. Presiding? Constantine, who needed one religion for one empire. Not divine revelation from above, a procurement brief from below. The vote taken in that hall determined which texts would stay in the Bible and which would burn, who became a saint and who became a heretic, and most importantly, who would get the exclusive rights to explain God to billions of people. The losers didn't make it into the textbooks. Their writings were buried, their names erased, their ideas rebranded as heresy. A beautiful word that means roughly inconvenient for whoever's in charge right now. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is history. And it's considerably more uncomfortable than the version they teach in Sunday school. You're watching Academic Troll, the channel for people who want to know more without being bored to death in the process. Like, subscribe, let's go.
The Gospels that didn't make the cut. 1st, 2nd century. Christianity isn't a religion. It's dozens of competing movements, each with its own texts, its own teachers, and its own completely different version of who Jesus was. In some, he's a wise teacher. In others, a mystic with secret knowledge reserved for the few. In others still, not quite human at all. Then someone sat down and sorted through everything. 4 Gospels, approved. The rest, out. Take the Gospel of Thomas. No miracles, no narrative, just 114 short sayings. The core idea, the kingdom of God is within you. Not in a temple, not through a priest. If people actually believe that, the middleman becomes redundant. For any future vertical hierarchy, that reads like an obituary. Or the Gospel of Mary. She understands the teaching better than the apostles, and Peter is furious. A woman with more authority than him. Another problem. Texts like these didn't accidentally fail to make the canon. They were banned, burned, buried. In 367 AD, Bishop Athanasius sent a circular to monasteries listing the approved books, with explicit instructions to destroy everything else. Some survived anyway. More on that later. They were removed not because they were false, but because they were inconvenient. Those are fundamentally different grounds, but in both cases, the manuscript burns exactly the same way.
Mary Magdalene, how to turn an apostle into a prop. Here's a scene that's actually in the Gospels, the crucifixion. The apostles have scattered, some in panic, some in denial. Peter specifically denied knowing Jesus 3 times before sunrise. Standing at the cross, a woman. She's also the first to arrive at the tomb, the first to see the risen Christ, before Peter, before anyone. In the Gospel of Mary, she receives a revelation the apostles weren't given, and Peter responds with surgical precision. Did he really speak to a woman in secret without our knowledge? Early Christianity had 2 competing lines, the mystical, where spiritual authority has nothing to do with gender, and the hierarchical, which was male. The second one won, and then the quiet editing of Mary began. From closest disciple and first witness of the resurrection to repentant sinner with a complicated past. Beautiful, emotional, safe. Pope Gregory I in 591 AD officially merged her with several other women from Scripture and declared her a prostitute, without a single piece of evidence, simply because it was tidier that way. The Catholic Church acknowledged this error in 1969, 1,378 years later. Mary Magdalene survived in history, just not as the person she was. The Gnostics, the people who made priests redundant. Gnosis means knowledge, not the kind you read, the kind you experience directly. The Gnostics said, you don't need a church, a doctrine, or a priest. The divine is already inside you. Every person finds the way themselves. For any institution built on being the necessary intermediary, this is roughly equivalent to someone stapling a note to your front door. God available direct, no appointment needed. Have a great day. The material world, in their view, is a flawed copy of something deeper. Salvation isn't absolution. It's waking up. Once you accept that, the entire apparatus, the sacraments, the hierarchy, the permission structure, becomes furniture nobody ordered. The human being is their own temple. Walk in anytime. Declared heretics. Texts burned. Followers hunted. By the 4th century, almost nothing remained. Almost, because in 1945, an Egyptian farmer digging near a cliff hit a sealed clay jar. Inside, 52 texts. The Nag Hammadi library had been sitting in the ground for 1,600 years. The version that won needed you dependent. The version that lost made you sufficient. That's not theology. That's a market structure.
The Jesus they voted for. Nicaea 325 AD. One question on the agenda. Is Jesus fully God, or the first and greatest thing God created? Sounds like a seminary exam. It was a question about who runs the world for the next 2,000 years. Version 1. Jesus is God. You need the church to reach him. Temples, sacraments, priests, a hierarchy with keys. Version 2. Jesus is a teacher. You need the teaching. The institution becomes a reading group. Optional. 2 different Jesuses were already in circulation. The Gospel of John. I am the way, the truth, and the life. You come to him. The Gospel of Thomas, which didn't make the final cut. The kingdom is inside you and outside you. You go inward. One version requires a guide. The other says you already know the way. The version with more political allies won. Not more compelling arguments. Allies. Constantine needed one manageable religion for one empire. Letting people find God themselves was not part of the brief. The vote was near unanimous. 2 against. Looked decisive in the minutes. The Arians refused to accept it for another 50 years, but the minutes were already signed, and that's the version that made it to print. The Vatican Archive. 53 miles of other people's secrets. There's a place whose name alone sends conspiracy theorists into spasms and makes historians clear their throats respectfully. The Apostolic Archive of the Vatican. Officially, just a large library. 53 miles of shelving, 1.5 million documents, papal letters, inquisitor reports, correspondence with kings. Access? Researchers only. By permission. Permission? Only for those deemed trustworthy. The Vatican gradually releases portions of the archive, but does so the way a card player reveals only the hands that benefit him. Slowly, in measured doses, with the expression of someone who has absolutely nothing to hide. There's no single smoking manuscript that would shatter faith. That's the stuff of paperback thrillers. What might be there is the documentary record of how human decisions became divine truth. Early versions of Gospels, material showing why some ideas won and others were destroyed. Correspondence about a process that is now called revelation rather than politics. This is the classic logic of the priestly class. Control the past, control the present. Control the present, control what billions of people believe. The archive is closed. History has been written. Access by appointment. Appointments by referral. Christianity borrowed. Here's the receipt. Christmas on December 25th. The Bible gives no such date. No hint, no indication, no star with coordinates. But on exactly that day, the Roman Empire celebrated Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. Light defeats darkness. The winter solstice falls a few days earlier, December 21st, 22nd, but the festive season is the same. The dying and rising god. This already existed. Osiris in Egypt, Dionysus among the Greeks, Mithras among Roman soldiers. A virgin who gives birth to a divine son. Isis and Horus, thousands of years before Christmas. Bread and wine as the body and blood of a god. Mystery religion traditions of antiquity, where participants literally consumed their deity during ritual. The cross, centuries before Christianity, a symbol of life and rebirth across dozens of cultures. The church's explanation was simple. Demons planted these symbols in advance to confuse people. Quite the forward-planning operation. Historians read it differently. Early Christianity spoke the language its audience already knew. It borrowed the imagery and rewired the meaning. If the symbols, the myths, and the entire architecture of the faith are built on foundations that predate Christ by centuries, that's not an anomaly. That's a pattern.
which makes the claim to exclusive, original, revealed truth considerably harder to run. The demons did it. Unverified, but dramatic.
The Inquisition, editing reality. 1252. Pope Innocent IV officially authorizes torture during Inquisition interrogations. Not as an abuse of the system, as an instrument of it. Written into the papal bull, signed, sealed, in the name of love for one's neighbor. Officially, the Inquisition was created to protect the faith from heresy. In practice, it was a machine for controlling, not behavior, but thought. Women who spoke too freely about God, scholars with inconvenient questions, mystics with personal experience instead of institutional permission. Giordano Bruno was burned for a long list of heresies, including the idea that other worlds might exist. Michael Servetus was burned for denying the Trinity, not by Catholics, as it happens, but in Geneva, by Calvin. The Reformation, it turned out, simply replaced one set of inquisitors with another. The Inquisition wasn't hunting criminals, it was hunting alternatives, because any alternative threatens a monopoly, and the monopoly on God is the most valuable asset in human history. Not just people were burned, ideas, books, entire traditions of spiritual inquiry. The fires weren't punishment, they were editorial revision, the most radical method of removing the changes you don't like. The Inquisition isn't a dark stain on an otherwise clean record. It's the predictable outcome of a system that declared itself the sole source of truth. It worked exactly as designed. The power you don't feel as power. There are things the Church controlled openly. Which books you could read, whose war was holy, who was the legitimate king. That's in the textbooks. But the real power was different. It lived in the fact that people internally agreed with the worldview, voluntarily, without compulsion, through fear of hell, embedded in childhood so deeply it felt like your own thought, through guilt that needed no explanation. It simply existed, like a birthmark. The Church didn't just say God will punish you. It said, without us, you don't even know who you are or why you exist. That's a fundamentally different level of control. The first kind is external, visible, breakable, punishable. The second kind is internal, nearly impossible to detect because it looks exactly like your own thinking. You're convinced you arrived at the conclusion yourself. That's precisely why the Reformation didn't happen until the 16th century. Not because people lacked courage, but because the printing press arrived and the monopoly on text cracked. Luther nailed his theses to the door, and within 20 years they had spread across Europe faster than Rome could figure out what to do about it. The first viral content in history. The Church had no immune response. The most powerful control is the kind you don't recognize as control.
The monk who didn't burn them. 1945, Egypt. A farmer digging near the cliffs of Jabal al-Tarif finds a red clay jar. Inside, 13 leather-bound books, 52 texts. Some of them, copies of Gospels the Church had been destroying for over 1,000 years. They had been in the ground since the 4th century. Someone buried them, most likely a monk from a nearby monastery, when word reached him of the order to burn all heretical manuscripts. He didn't burn them. He wrapped them in leather, placed them in the jar, and buried them at the base of the cliff, as if he knew that eventually the times would change. When the texts were finally read, the picture of early Christianity changed, permanently. There had been a second line all along, a path of inner knowledge versus external obedience. Jesus as a teacher of awakening, God not above you, but within. This line wasn't destroyed, it was filtered out, rebranded as heresy, and buried in the most literal sense possible. Jesus may have taught, look inside. The Church turned that into, come to us. He may have taught people how to see, and we turned it into a list of things to believe. One small shift in framing, 2,000 years of consequences. An anonymous monk in the 4th century understood this before we did. That's why he didn't burn them. That's why we're having this conversation at all.
10 stories, one machine. 10 stories, one mechanism. Lost Gospels, Mary Magdalene, the Gnostics, the Council of Nicaea, the Inquisition, the Vatican Archive. Symbols borrowed from older religions. The pattern is the same everywhere. Not the evil scheme of a single villain in a dungeon.
Simply a large institution doing what every large institution does, selecting the version of truth that best sustained itself, removing anything that let people bypass the middleman, keeping everything that required one. Sometimes elegantly, sometimes with fire. Personal faith? That's yours. Nobody's touching it. But between you and your faith, there has long been an institution with a hierarchy, an archive, and a monopoly on what counts as true. The man they call the way, the truth, and the life apparently taught the way is inside you. Find it yourself. We took that and built one of the largest bureaucratic machines in human history. He taught people to seek. We turned it into obey and called it following his teaching. That's all from me. Other channels usually spend the outro begging you to like, subscribe, and comment. I won't even mention it. I'll just make the next video. You'll figure it out.